boring border battles, the smitten right hand of God, and what an inactive Black Monday means for the future. Let's get into the vibe. Welcome to the vibe of the Vikings, where we catch the real feel of Vikings football. I'm Josh Kolojeski. Welcome to our very first episode. Probably not the best that we have it right at the end of the season, but hey, a 5-game winning streak to end the 2025 roller coaster of a season. The game, not so entertaining, but it is a 16-3 win for your Minnesota Vikings over the Green Bay Packers, which marks yet another year where the Vikings pick up at least one win against Green Bay. That streak going back to 2021 was the first time we at least split a season series with the Packers. The game was all right from an entertainment perspective. There wasn't a whole lot going on once J.J. McCarthy left the game with an injury, but we'll get a little bit more into that as this show goes on. The big story was the defense and just how dominant it looked, albeit it was against Clayton Tune. And as we think of the entertainment value of this game, it kind of reminds me of some other boring border battles from the past. Namely, one is from 2006, where the Minnesota Vikings and Green Bay Packers matched up in the penultimate week of the season. The Packers won that game 9-7, but there was basically nothing on the line. Both teams entered with a 6-8 record. They had already been eliminated from playoff contention. And in the game, Minnesota's only score came from an interception return touchdown by Fred Smoot. That was also Tavares Jackson's first ever game starting at quarterback for the Purple. But there wasn't really much going on throughout the course of that game, and it also had the dull vibes of early Thursday night football. That was back in the stone ages of Thursday night football, before even like the Jaguars and Titans games were like the norm there. This was even worse entertainment value and worse broadcast, worse graphics, worse everything than that second iteration of Thursday Night Football moving forward. Another boring game that was a little bit more meaningful between these two teams was back in 2017, where the Vikings got a shutout 16-0. But again, the Packers weren't really fighting for anything at that point. I believe the Vikings had already lost out on the potential to get the number 1 seed in the playoffs. So they were going up against Brett Hundley, and they made Brett Hundley look like Brett Hundley, just like they made Clayton Tune look like Clayton Tune in this past Sunday's game. But a win is a win, and the Minnesota Vikings finished the season with a 9-8 record. According to the Pro NFL website, Next Gen Stats, from the very kickoff of this game, gave the Vikings an 82% chance to win. And if you look at the graph of play-by-play, how that percentage went up and down throughout the course of the contest, it is a pretty flat line. There wasn't much that kind of swayed the way that this Vikings game would go. The Packers never moved that 82% into the 50% range. I think it got into the lower 70s as the lowest percent chance that the Vikings had to win this game. But the Vikings, Vegas knew it, were 13.5-point favorites. Next Gen Stats knew it with the 82% number from the very start. This game was going to be pretty lifeless, and it was going to probably be a Vikings win. And that it was. And J.J. McCarthy in this game got the start, coming off of the injured right hand, and he looked pretty good on that first drive. If you're asking me what was the biggest thing to look for from this game, it is to see how J.J. McCarthy responded after a couple of good weeks leading up to the injury, to see if he had lost anything or if he still had that accuracy, because the accuracy has been so far up and down so far this season. And it was accurate early on, and granted, a lot of the passes were short, and they were really trying to get Justin Jefferson involved in the game early so he could get to his 1,000-yard mark, which he did. But they were targeting him a lot. They were targeting him in short spaces. They even had a jet sweep pop pass, which technically counts as one of J.J. McCarthy's 5 completions on 5 pass attempts to start the game. But from there, it got a little bit rocky, and it's kind of what we've seen from J.J. McCarthy so far this season is that he can have those high moments, but there's also those very, very low moments. And in those low moments, we have a throw high to Addison that ended up being a completion, but it was kind of the start of the inaccuracies in this game for McCarthy. And it kind of began a run of low points for him. He had a more roller coaster pass in, pass out later on in this game, but he also had a couple of stinkers all in a row right in the middle portions of that first quarter. He also had a couple of bad throws to Ben Sims. That was deep down the field on a rollout, which he might have had him open on that over route, but he kind of just sails it over the secondary, sails it over everybody's head in the secondary. And then there was another one that probably should have been intercepted, where he was trying to hit Ben Sims as well, and the Packers were able to read it, tip it into the air, and it just fell harmlessly to the turf. But that was one that could have easily been intercepted, and I believe on the broadcast they even said something about that. So some low points there, and then a missed high throw to Justin Jefferson on a 3rd and 7 slant where it looked like he got the inside release, but the coverage was there pretty tight, so it would have been a bang-bang contested catch play, and Justin Jefferson, for whatever reason, has had some difficulties catching those contested passes this year. So we can't really knock that one up as a missed completion because we can't say for certain that it would have been completed, but it was an inaccurate pass. It went well over his head and didn't really give JJ a chance to come down with the ball. And I think the inaccuracies early, for me, it looked like it stemmed from that desire to get Justin Jefferson to 1,000 yards. And they had the good game plan early to get him with those short passes, as we mentioned earlier. But when it got into later in that first quarter, early in the second quarter, there were a lot of forced targets or forced first reads to Justin Jefferson that kind of threw McCarthy a little bit out of the loop if they were covered. And he would either throw a bad pass to Jefferson, or he would have to come off of that read and try to make other things work in the offense. And sometimes he was able to do that, and sometimes he wasn't able to do that. So he was trying. I think the game plan was trying to get J.J. Jefferson, that is, the over 1,000 yards early, and I think it played a little bit to the detriment of McCarthy in the middle portions of his start. Now, later on in the start, after Jefferson had gone over the 1,000 yards, there were still some hit and misses, and it was kind of alternating good and bad plays, one right after another. He'd have a really nice throw, and then he'd have a really poor throw. He made a strong completion on a field goal drive to Jalen Naylor over the middle of the field, but then they get into the red zone, and he misses Justin Jefferson on an outbreaking route into the back corner of the end zone. He was open, and JJ, I don't know if it was an inaccurate pass or he just didn't think that Jefferson was as open as he was, but the anticipation wasn't there, and he kind of sails it out of the back of the end zone. So that's a throw that you need to make as an NFL quarterback, and McCarthy not able to make it right there. And that's the low points that we've seen from J.J. McCarthy this season, and it's kind of been what has given a lot of fans pause as to whether or not he will be the face of this NFL franchise. But the reason I think that he could very potentially still be that face of the franchise and be the first franchise quarterback we've had since Fran Tarkenton is because of the pass that he made to Ben Sims in the second quarter as the Vikings were going in for their first and only touchdown of the game. He's feeling the pressure. He's flushed from the pocket. He's rolling out to his right, and he throws a sideline dart to Ben Sims, who's there. It was layered well because there were multiple Packers heads who it sailed over, so he couldn't just throw it on a line or else it would have gotten knocked down. He layered it well. It was accurate. It was right where it was supposed to be, and it showed his playmaking ability that he had at times while he was with the Michigan Wolverines. In fact, when he was rolling out, I remember a specific throw when I was watching film of McCarthy from Michigan, where he's rolling to his left during the 2023 season and hits his tight end in the back of the end zone for a touchdown. So that was the kind of throw that it reminded me of, and that's why I think there's still some hope for J.J. McCarthy. If there's anything that gives me pause, it's not the inaccuracies. I think those have, for the most part, been fleshed out. As long as, I don't know, if he's able to keep the mechanics that he has now, it looks like he wasn't having to think as much about the mechanics through these weeks where he's looked good and the passes were accurate anyway, whereas when he had the mechanical issues and was focused purely on that footwork, that's when the inaccuracies came, sometimes due to mistiming, and maybe that's just because he wasn't working with a clear head at that point. So I think those inaccuracies, at least for now, have been fleshed out, and he's going to work on his mechanics over the offseason, so hopefully that it's something in 2026. It's not on the top of his mind whenever he drops back to passes to make sure the footwork is there. It's just something that comes second nature, so that will get the inaccuracies down even more because you've got the overthinking out of the picture, and you've also got the mechanical issues hopefully ironed out. Now that is a big if, and that's something that McCarthy will need to work towards all offseason, starting 20 minutes after the end of the game. We need him to have that sort of will and desire to go out and improve himself, and I think he has, especially in Michigan. In 2022 with the Michigan Wolverines, McCarthy was not a first-round quarterback, and there were mock drafts at the time that it looked like they had McCarthy projected as a first rounder, and I would watch the film from his 2022 season and I'd be like, I don't see that at all. And for the most of the 2023 season, not watching college football as much and just focusing on Vikings football, when there was a chance that he would go top 10, top 15, and was still a projected first round pick, I was like, what are these draft analysts thinking? And then you look at the tape, and 2023 showed huge improvements from 2022. So he's been able to work on himself and make himself better throughout the course of an offseason, and I think he has the opportunity to do that now. Now, the only thing that gives me some concern is that injury. And it's not because I think that he's this injury-prone player. I think that he's been unlucky in some senses where he, gets the knee injury in his first ever preseason game, and that kind of paints the picture in our mind as J.J. McCarthy being this injury-prone player, and then that's further cemented when he gets the ankle injury and then the concussion, and all these kind of little moments where it's like, man, he just keeps getting injured, but all these are different injuries. It's not like he's injuring the same knee, he's injuring the same ankle. None of them have to do one after another. I think it's just an unfortunate series of football hits that have kind of come all at once throughout the last year and a half. But the right hand injury could be concerning because it is a fracture from what they've said. McCarthy said fractures, plural, at the end of the game during his post-game press conference, and leading up to the week, for this Packer week, he was telling reporters, when asked about the injury to his hand, he said, which one? And they clarified and said, oh, the injury to your hand, and McCarthy responded, which one? So it seems like there have been multiple injuries, and he said he's been dealing with this a lot through the second half of this season, and we've known that it's not necessarily the pain, but the numbness and not being able to hold a football. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not gonna go and get all medical here, but that is a little bit concerning because that could point to some nerve issues, which is a little bit more longer lasting, and it could maybe, if that had been something that had been plaguing him since the middle of the season, that could be the root cause of some of those inaccuracies as well, as he's just not able to feel the football at times. I don't know if that is the case, but if that is the case, then you've obviously got yourself an issue, because those nerve problems can just affect him throughout his whole career, and it could be something that, one, keeps him out of full seasons and also affects his ability to throw the football. So we're going to monitor that throughout the course of the preseason because he did, or the offseason, because he did leave this game after his first play of the third quarter, and it was him shaking his right hand, and that is what the injury ended up being. So it'll be nice to see how he rehabs, how he does once training camp rolls around. But it doesn't, for me, it doesn't mean that we have to go looking for a guy to compete with McCarthy as the starter. You obviously want a good veteran here, and we can explore more options as the season goes on. But for McCarthy, he needs a backup that can play for him, but not, I don't know, not overpower him. So we'll see what the Vikings do in the backup market, but I think he should have this job. Just based on the peaks that we've seen, I think you give him another year to really figure it out. And that third year is kind of make or break for most players anyway, especially as quarterbacks. So you see what you have in him, you explore the backup market for a reliable veteran, not one that's going to compete with him in camp, or if he does compete with him in camp, make it one of those mock competitions and go from there. And I think that's what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Minnesota Vikings brass have in mind as well. Other things from this game, it looked like the defense really has come into its own, unfortunately a little bit too late in the final half of the season. They only gave up, the Minnesota Vikings defense, again, granted, they were going up against Clayton Tune in this game, but through the last 8 or 9 weeks, the last 8 weeks, the Vikings defense only gave up 1 touchdown pass. 1 touchdown pass over 8 weeks in the modern day NFL. That is incredible. Like, you're playing some really good teams. You're playing the Detroit Lions, who got that 1 touchdown pass. You're playing Dak Prescott and his Dallas Cowboys, who are one of the best passing teams in the league. You've got the Ravens. The Ravens is where one of them had come from, but you've got Caleb Williams that you're going against during this stretch. And, I mean, it's very, very, I think, heartening to see that this Minnesota Vikings defense can do that even without elite members in the secondary. We were rotating safeties. We had Fabian Moreau, who wasn't even on the roster at the beginning of the season, who was signed because he had showed flashes last year while he was with the team. He was signed kind of in that September window, especially when Jeff Okudah got hurt and ended up not coming back at all this season. You have Fabian Moreau. You have Byron Murphy, who's a good cornerback. You've got Isaiah Rodgers, who's a good cornerback, but we've seen got burned. And those guys aren't giving up touchdowns. And a lot of it is a credit to the front 7 and what all of those guys were able to do in this game. I mean, Jonathan Grenard's been out for the last 3 games. Dallas Turner has really come into his own. And you see him get off the line of scrimmage in the blink of an eye, timing the snap count with the pure speed and athleticism. That was the raw talent that a lot of scouts saw that hadn't been refined yet, but is starting to get refined here at the end of his second season, where he just destroyed Clayton Tune a couple of times, one of the times forcing a fumble, in fact. And then Andrew Van Ginkel just continues to be old reliable, getting his hands in passing lanes on screens. And then also, he did a really good job at stopping the outside run, holding his edge, getting low, and cutting off the feet of Emmanuel Wilson anytime he tried to get to the outside on Van Ginkel's side. And then Blake Cashman and Eric Wilson have been phenomenal as well in the second half of the season, and they both got some free rushes onto Clayton Tune during this game. And Eric Wilson's a guy, if you told me at the beginning of the season that he would outplay Ivan Pace and become the de facto starter next to Blake Cashman, I kind of would have been a little bit more concerned at what was happening, because when he was with the Vikings the first time, Eric Wilson was a player that was often in the wrong spot, and it sometimes led to bigger plays. He would make a couple splash plays throughout the course of the season, and it would make us think that he was better than he actually was, because he would come up with some sacks and interceptions, but more often than not, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. This season was the exact opposite. Eric Wilson in run fits and in blitzes was doing everything that you need You want your inside linebacker. He could probably still do some more work in coverages, but it's been a revelation for Minnesota, and I think they need to bring him back because he showed a consistent ability to now be in the right place and still make those splash plays, and in fact make those splash plays at an even more consistent basis. So the Vikings defense, especially if they can bring back Eric Wilson, I really like moving forward, and I know that's not something that's completely out there to say, but it was good in this game, and the only score, of course, came when Matt LaFleur apparently had money on the Packers to cover the 13.5 points, so he kicked the field goal as time expired, purposefully calling a timeout with 1 second left just to avoid the shutout and or, cover that 13.5 point spread. So the Vikings finished the season with a 9-8 record. They are tied with Detroit, but because they have the 2 wins over Detroit this season, that gives them the tiebreaker, meaning they are the de facto third place team in the NFC North. And that is something to look at moving forward, I think, is that how good this team was after the 4-8 start. And to see that turnaround mid-season, to technically, yes, only be a game out of the playoffs, and of course I'm going to enjoy making bad faith arguments all season long about, the Panthers are 8-9. Why aren't the Vikings in the playoffs? We need to make a rule change. Every team seems to have that, whatever is the first wild card team left out each and every year. But the Vikings finished the season 9-8. They finished the season with a winning record. It's the 4th year in a row that the Vikings have had a 4 or 5 game winning streak under the Kevin O'Connell era. So they are able to put these stretches of good football together, and I think that is very, very encouraging for the future and is definitely, a gold star to Kevin O'Connell. I know some people, I've seen comments on Reddit and Twitter that are like, oh, let's get rid of Kevin O'Connell, which would be the craziest thing ever. Now we can talk about someone else and some other coaches that we could perhaps get rid of, and I would be fine with a little bit later on in this show. But let's address the 9-8 record and what the downside of that is. And that is how far the Vikings fell in the draft. And I know there's a school of thought which is you want your team to tank to get the better draft pick as soon as it becomes clear that they're not going to make the postseason. And at 4-8, it was pretty clear that the Vikings weren't going to make the playoffs. You could say, all right, let's just lose the rest of the games. And you could be cheering for that because of what it means for perhaps your future. The Vikings at one point had the number 11 pick, I think was the highest that they got up to, and they fall now all the way down to number 18. So you lose some 7 spots in the draft, and that's not only in the first round, you drop 7 spots in every successive round from there, at least for every pick that you own in rounds 2 through 7. And that does, come at a cost, but I think, I don't know, I like what I saw. And I like that we won these last 5 games. One, because it was fun football and it wasn't watching a losing team. And while part of me does agree with the logic of wanting to lose, obviously the players aren't going to do that. And it was something that Kevin O'Connell talked about in the post-game presser after this win over the Packers. And he was talking about the team culture. And we've seen that team culture. We all remember the Sam Darnold video at the end of the Packers game last year, where the whole team is rallying around him, putting him up in the air, a quarterback that had been, much maligned by the entire football media, bunch of football teams that didn't think that he was the answer. He had been cast aside, and now he beats the Packers. He gets Minnesota to 14-2 at that point, and he is being paraded around the locker room. And that's the good culture, and that culture is easy to build in those good times. And I think any coach, any locker room can have that culture when you're 14-2 and when you're 14-3. Kevin O'Connell had a team that was 4-8. And he talks about the resiliency of that team to not give up. They played their best football after being 4-8. And it wasn't against bad teams all the time. Sometimes it was. It was against Washington. It was against the New York Giants. But it was against a really good Dallas Cowboys offense that was playing for their playoff lives. It was against the Detroit Lions, who had been whooping us the last 3 years. They were fighting for their playoff lives, and we made them look like fools with Max Brosmer at quarterback. This team was playing hard all the way, and it reflects that this culture for Minnesota is not something that depends on how well the team is doing. This is a culture, a locker room mentality that allows itself to bounce back from those hard times. So when you get in a season and you're 7-6 and need to win some games, your locker room guys, your culture is not going to collapse from underneath your feet after a bad loss that perhaps takes you out of playoff contention for the moment. And it allows you to get back into that playoff conversation when you're middling around 500, which the Vikings, could be next year. Or maybe they're 4-6 and need to really go on a run, and they're able to do that. We've seen the potential of that. And I think that importance and that verification for us as fans that, no, this locker room culture is legitimate, good times and bad, I think that is worth dropping the 7 spots in the draft and perhaps missing out on a Jermon McCoy or a Mansour Delane and having to settle for like an Avian Terrell or a guy that I really like in Caden McDonald. I still think there's going to be guys available at 18 that are going to make Minnesota Vikings fans very, very happy. And we'll talk about that as the offseason progresses. But for me, that 7 spot is worth it. That 7 spot drop is worth it if it means we get to physically see how good this team culture really is. Now, a lot of these guys in the offseason are going to perhaps be gone. They're going to sign free agent contracts elsewhere. They could be cap casualties like Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, perhaps. But that core, that locker room core, the head coach is there, Kevin O'Connell, where it all stems from, that culture is going to remain. And then the other thing, kind of as a smaller example, is if the Minnesota Vikings go 0-5 down the stretch instead of 5-0, and it happens to coincide with J.J. McCarthy playing as poorly as he did during that Baltimore-Chicago-Green Bay stretch after he had come back from the ankle injury. The way you go 0-5 is if J.J. McCarthy plays as poorly as he did in his first half of this season. And then you really start to doubt whether the Vikings have a quarterback. And I think if he had played that way, then you'd certainly entertain bringing in some competition at the starting quarterback position and perhaps kind of doing what the Colts did and really just moving on from the first round pick and really exploring more options. But because McCarthy looked so good during the last few weeks of the season, injuries aside, I think that gives you a little bit more confidence going forward. It gives me confidence. I think it gives the front office confidence that quarterback, you don't need to trade the farm for Mac Jones if you don't, if you want him to be your starter next year. And I think that would be a bad idea because I think he gives you a very, very solid floor, but not a very high ceiling either. So, McCarthy showing us some flashes that he can do at the NFL level, what he was able to do at Michigan with some of these playmaking. Yes, some valleys even in those peaks, but overall, it gives me a little bit more confidence and comfort that we're going into the offseason with a guy that I think can still start for us during his 2026 season. So, that is the end of the Minnesota Vikings season. And they start heading into the offseason. And yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday, yesterday is Black Monday, and the Purple end up not firing anybody. Now, there are some head coaches around the league whose firings affect the Purple, I think. And we can talk about that right now, or in just a moment after we kind of go through the list of the guys that you would put on your hot seat rankings. And obviously at the top of that is Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. He has not been fired, and I have not seen any reporting that would suggest that he will be fired or that anyone in the front office will be let go. And for me, I can go both ways. I could certainly see Kwesi being a deserved termination. He's done some good things in free agency. He was able to kind of resettle the cap after Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer had ruined it trying to go all in after the 2017 and 2018 seasons. He was able to fix that and get us into a competitive spot. The competitive rebuild, the plan worked, but his ability to draft and his ability to scout and even his ability to trade draft picks and get proper value for those trades of draft picks has been concerning. And I know he's not the football guy. He's not the scout. You bring in Ryan Grigson for that to kind of lead the scouting department and tell Kwesi who the best available players are. And I think that's an indictment on Ryan Grigson, and Ryan Grigson could almost certainly be let go. But when you are giving up as much value as Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has in the draft with that trade with the Houston Texans to get into the first round, and then the trade up even further to get Dallas Turner, with the trade up, the small trade up with the Jets to move up one spot, you're losing a lot of trade value there, and you're not making much of it up, and you're not doing it to make necessarily a huge splash. And we saw Kwesi when he had the opportunity to make a big splash on a couple of different occasions kind of get a little bit trigger shy. So he's willing to waste and burn draft picks at times when it's not necessarily worth it, but then he's not willing to do that when you have the opportunity to trade your 2 first-round picks, a first round the next year, to try and go up to get Drake May. And obviously some change to go along with that. But the reporting was from certain sources that the Vikings were interested in Drake May, that the Patriots were interested in perhaps trading back, but that their price was too high. But would any of us right now, with Drake May at quarterback, be complaining about not having a draft pick in the 2026 NFL draft? Or not having a draft pick last year in the first round of the 2025 NFL draft? No, we would be very satisfied with Drake May at quarterback and the team also being built around him, which I think is a credit to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, is the veterans that they brought in. Even though Javon Hargrave didn't have his best season, he got better as the season went on. Jonathan Allen, I think, played better this year than he did in the last couple of years at Washington. Kwesi saw that. Kwesi got those guys. He was able to build veterans, but he just was not able to do anything with those younger draft picks. And then another opportunity where he missed out, and I guess this was probably a good reason why he missed out, was trying to trade up for Anthony Richardson in the 2023 NFL draft, where they were offering 3 first-round picks to get up to number 4 and swap with the Colts, or number 3 and swap with the Cardinals, and just weren't able to do that. So that's 2 times that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah had the opportunity to really impact the franchise's future, and he is unable to pull the trigger. He gets cold feet. And then other times he's letting the Detroit Lions get Jamison Williams and the Green Bay Packers get Christian Watson in trades that didn't, for trading down with your division, it comes at a little bit more of a cost. And I think he got equal trade value in those 2 trades back during his 2022 draft, his first draft, and in further drafts ended up getting shortchanged in the draft pick compensation for his trade downs and or trade ups. So that's why I could see it being deserved for Kwesi, because the reason you bring him in is to be that numbers guy and to be able to find the right value and to negotiate the right value, because he's not bringing anything in the way of scouting, and if he can't do that, then what's the point of having him? If he can't do scouting, if he can't get the trade value stuff right, what's the point of having him around? It looks like he's going to be here to stay. So far, we've heard nothing about special teams coordinator Matt Daniels, who I think could also be a worthy cut. It'd be great to see him gone. I know that our kicker, Will Reichert, had an outstanding season, perhaps one of the best in Vikings history. Ryan Wright made huge, drastic improvements from prior seasons and was quietly one of the best punters in the National Football League. But I don't know how much you really give that to Matt Daniels, and I'm a little bit ignorant as to how heavy-handed and how heavily special teams coordinators work with kickers and punters on the mechanics. I think that's probably more of them getting their own coaching kind of separate from the rest of the special teams unit. But if Matt Daniels obviously had a hand in that, a major hand in getting those two guys to be as good as they were, then that's a credit to him and perhaps a case to keep him around. But I don't think that he has a huge hand in those guys' development and improvement and just pure ability this year. I think most of what he is doing is punt return, kick return, punt coverage, kick coverage stuff. And that hasn't worked. And it's not just one time that it doesn't work. It is we're allowing big returns. We're getting penalties on every big kick return that we have. And it was numerous penalties. It seemed like there was a stretch during the season where we were getting 2 penalty flags guaranteed just on our special teams unit. And I think special teams unit flags probably come at a higher rate across the NFL as opposed to just regular plays from scrimmage anyway. But that is a lot of penalties, a lot of hidden yards you're missing out on because Matt Daniels just can't get his stuff together and can't choose the right personnel or can't teach that personnel how to properly do kickoff coverage and how to properly block for a kick return. And ultimately, and you can point to the butterfly effect here in a second and say, well, no, this wouldn't have happened. Ultimately, that special teams failure cost Minnesota a spot in the playoffs and a home playoff game even. If the Minnesota Vikings, are able to cover a Devin Duvernay kickoff return and are able to stop Caleb Williams, which they had done a good job of during that second Chicago game, then the Minnesota Vikings win that game 17-16, and we are the NFC North champions. Now, obviously from there, every other team we're playing against, that changes everything. Every other team is playing for stuff against us. We're now perhaps putting more pressure on ourselves. You can't say that the Vikings would be 10-7 after that point, but for the sake of this argument, we're going to say that Matt Daniels probably cost the Vikings a chance at the playoffs and certainly cost them a chance to stay competitive throughout the rest of the season because at that point, the Packers game followed and we were 4-7, 4-6, and then eventually the Max Brosmer game in Seattle to fall to 4-8. Chris Cooper, I know a lot of people don't like him. Unpopular opinion, I'm fine to keep him around. I think you want that sort of continuity on the offensive line, and he was working through some stuff, and we saw Justin Skol really improve throughout the course of the season. We saw Donovan Jackson turn into his own in his rookie campaign. He looked good, and when we had issues at center with Ryan Kelly's injuries and Michael Juergens' injuries, he was able to develop Juergens and then Blake Brandel, who had never taken a snap at center, and get them to play not lights out, but better than you'd expect them to. I mean, I know Blake Brandel had some pretty bad games at center, but he also had some good games and looked better than I would ever imagine someone who has never played center would look. Will Fries has been a little bit of a disappointment, but I mean, he's been solid with Brian O'Neill. He's been the offensive line coach for most of Christian Darrisaw's career, and we've seen how good he is. I am fine keeping Chris Cooper around for the sake of continuity, and because of what he's shown, I think it is nowhere near as bad as the Twitter sphere of Purple Nation would have you think. So, those are the guys that were perhaps on the chopping block for Minnesota. None of them have been chopped. You've heard my thoughts. Around the league, there has been a couple of coaches that have been chopped, including one that I think it will be very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings to keep an eye on, and that is Pete Carroll getting canned in Las Vegas as their head coach. And if there's any place that Brian Flores would go, well, first of all, I don't think that he is going to take another defensive coordinator job elsewhere. Matt Eberflus got fired by the Cowboys. I think the Wilfs will pony up to match whatever salary Dallas or anyone else is willing to pay Brian Flores, and I think a lot of that reporting of the Cowboys, being a spot that it looks like Flores could land was probably coming from the Flores camp and Flores' agent to try and get him that big payday. It just so happened to align with the time where the Vikings defense started really playing lights out. Those rumors start to fire up again. So the timing makes sense. I think if on equal footing given the chance between Dallas and Minnesota. If Minnesota is willing to foot the bill and equal match and perhaps even given more to Brian Flores than Dallas is, I think that Flores chooses to stay in Minnesota because of what he's already built here and because he has already the talent in his toolbox to do whatever it is that he wants to do. And I think that goes for any NFL team. And obviously that depends, are the Wilfs willing to pony up and spend to keep Brian Flores? And throughout the tenure of the Wilfs, this isn't the pull ads. Based on what we've seen in the past, I would expect them to pony up and keep Flores around if it came to just dollars and cents and nothing else, which I think certainly is the case. So, I don't think he's going to be a defensive coordinator, and I didn't think that he would have a head coaching opportunity anywhere in the NFL, especially with the lawsuit, until that lawsuit goes away. I think the NFL owners is a big boys club. I think when they want to be scornful, they can be scornful, and if they can be petty and keep Brian Flores from having a head coaching job, then they're going to do that because of what he's done in suing the NFL and kind of get a little bit of payback in that way. It's not collusion, but it's not not collusion. I think there's certainly a concentrated effort to not have Brian Flores as a head coach in the NFL. Now, the one team that I think could break that mold is the Las Vegas Raiders, and they now have a head coaching vacancy, and that is because of Tom Brady being there, and Tom Brady not necessarily... He's the minority owner, but he's like the decision-making owner, and he's not going to be your old school owner's owner where it's just based on going to the Hamptons and watching a game and just sticking your nose up at anything that is unsightly, any sort of touchdown celebration that is unsightly, and kind of that rich guy sort of attitude. Tom Brady is rich, but he's going to be focused on the football of it all. And he has a relationship with Brian Flores. And I could see, in order to change the culture, him bringing in Brian Flores. And I think that is something that Vikings fans should be wary of. I think we should be keeping an eye on all the candidates for Las Vegas. If Vegas doesn't hire Brian Flores, I think Brian Flores is back in purple. But I think there's a 40% chance that the Raiders do, in fact, hire Brian Flores. And then we have to start looking elsewhere for our defensive coordinator. And that obviously would be a little bit of a shame. Well, that is the vibe on the 16-3 Vikings win over the Green Bay Packers. You've been tuned in to the Vibe of the Vikings. I'm Josh Kolojeski with the Grey Duck Sports Network, and you can keep feeling the vibe, Vikings fans. Until next time, Skol.